The Xal'Tor warship loomed over the diplomatic station, a jagged construct of obsidian metal and pulsating blue energy. Its presence alone was an act of aggression, but the Xal'Tor never cared much for subtlety. Their envoy, Warlord Xal'Tor, had made that abundantly clear when he arrived, flanked by two towering guards, each bristling with ceremonial armor that looked more suited for the battlefield than a negotiation table. Across from him stood Colonel David Grissom, an aging officer with the calm, calculating stare of someone who had seen too many conflicts resolved through brute force. The Xal'Tor were demanding recompense for an alleged human violation of their territorial boundary, a mining vessel that had drifted too close to their sector. Diplomats had tried to smooth things over, but the Xal'Tor were a species bound by martial tradition. There would be no settlement, no compromise. Only combat. Xal'Tor's mandibles clicked in irritation. We honor the ways of the warrior. One champion from your kind, one from ours. A duel. The victor dictates the terms. Grissom exhaled sharply through his nose. The Xal'Tor's obsession with ritual combat was well documented, but expecting humans to play along was absurd. We don't settle disputes by fighting in an arena, Warlord, Grissom said, his tone measured but firm. We negotiate. We strategize. If this is truly about our mining vessel, I'm sure there's a negotiation will teach you nothing, Xal'Tor interrupted, his voice a low, guttural growl. Your kind believes you can step wherever you please. We will educate you otherwise. If you refuse, we will consider it a forfeit, and act accordingly. A forfeit. A thinly veiled threat. If humanity declined, it would be taken as a sign of weakness, an excuse for the Xal'Tor to escalate the conflict into something far worse than a single duel. Grissom glanced at his advisors, his officers. Silent agreement passed between them. They had no choice. We accept. A flicker of satisfaction passed over Xal'Tor's reptilian features. Then select your champion. We shall see if humans are more than just words. ####. Major Cole Reynolds stood at the edge of the observation deck, watching the Xal'Tor fleet through reinforced glass. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a frame built for endurance rather than intimidation. A soldier's soldier. His short-cropped brown hair had begun to silver at the temples, a testament to a life spent on battlefields that never made it into the history books. Explain to me again why we're humoring this nonsense? He asked, arms crossed over his chest. Because the alternative is war, Grissom replied, stepping beside him. And I'd rather not start a war over some idiot mining foreman who couldn't read a star chart. Reynolds exhaled through his teeth, tilting his head slightly. And I'm the lucky bastard you picked? You volunteered. Reynolds turned, raising a skeptical brow. Fine, Grissom admitted. You were volunteered. You're the best we have for this sort of thing. The Xal'Tor don't believe humans are real warriors. They think we hide behind technology. If we put someone in that ring who gets flattened in the first 10 seconds, it'll only confirm their suspicions. Reynolds rolled his shoulders, considering. And if I win? Grissom smirked. Then we remind them why underestimating humans is a very, very bad idea. ####. The arena was carved into the surface of a barren moon, its cracked, dusty ground surrounded by an energy barrier that shimmered under the station's artificial lights. It was primitive in design. No advanced weapons, no outside interference. Just two warriors facing off in front of an audience that would decide the fate of an entire dispute. Reynolds stood in the designated starting zone, adjusting the straps of his combat harness. His gear was stripped down to the essentials. No firearms, no energy weapons, just reinforced armor plating and a standard-issue combat knife. The Xal'Tor had made it clear they wanted a fight on their terms, and that meant no ranged weapons. Fine. He had never needed a gun to end a fight anyway. Across from him, the Xal'Tor champion stepped forward. Cathal was a towering brute of a creature, standing nearly 8 feet tall, his musculature encased in segmented plates of biosynthetic armor. His skin, a mottled shade of deep red and black, rippled as he flexed clawed fingers. Twin plasma blades extended from his gauntlets with a sharp hiss, their edges glowing a molten blue. He looked every bit the warrior his species revered. The assembled Xal'Tor warriors let out a rhythmic chant, pounding their fists against their chests in a ceremonial display of honor. Reynolds just cracked his neck. A Xal'Tor official stepped forward, raising a clawed hand. The duel will commence upon the signal. Combat ends when one of you is incapacitated or surrenders. Reynolds caught the way Cathal's mandibles twitched in amusement at that last word. Surrender wasn't an option. The official dropped his hand. Cathal moved first, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. For a creature that size, his speed was unnatural. Reynolds barely had time to sidestep as a plasma blade carved through the air where he had been standing, the heat licking against his armor. Fast, strong, but predictable. Asterisk asterisk. Reynolds twisted, driving an elbow into Cathal's side, aiming for the gap in his armor plating. The alien barely flinched before retaliating with a backhanded strike that sent Reynolds skidding backward. The crowd roared in approval. Cathal bared his fangs. Is that all, human? Reynolds spat out a bit of blood, rolling his shoulders. Nah. Just getting warmed up. Cathal charged again, and this time Reynolds was ready. He ducked low, avoiding the first blade, and stepped inside Cathal's guard before driving his knee into the alien's abdomen. The impact forced a grunt from the warrior, but Reynolds wasn't done. He grabbed Cathal's wrist and twisted hard, forcing the plasma blade away as he drove his own knife toward the exposed joint beneath Cathal's armor. The Xal'Tor barely managed to pull away, but not before the blade sank in, drawing black ichor. The chant from the Xal'Tor spectators faltered. This was not how the duel was supposed to go. Cathal stumbled back, shaking his arm as dark blood dripped onto the ground. His expression twisted into something that was no longer amused, no longer arrogant. It was cautious. Reynolds exhaled, rolling his wrist. Round 2. Cathal snarled, then activated his enhancement module. The shift was immediate. His armor pulsed as energy coursed through it, his muscles expanding, movements quickening. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he launched forward with twice the speed as before. Reynolds had seconds to react. He barely dodged the first strike, but the second slammed into his side, sending him flying into the energy barrier. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself back to his feet. Cathal loomed over him. Faster. Stronger. More dangerous. Asterisk asterisk. But Reynolds wasn't done either. He reached for the override switch on his harness. His combat exosuit hummed to life, redirecting power to his neural interface. His reflexes sharpened, pain dulled, movements became precise. Cathal lunged. Reynolds moved faster. His knife found another weak spot, then another. Every movement was deliberate, lethal. Cathal had strength, but Reynolds had something better. Asterisk asterisk skill asterisk asterisk. The Xal'Tor warriors watched in stunned silence as their champion stumbled, his body failing him. Reynolds stepped back, letting Cathal collapse onto one knee. He could finish this. One more strike and it was over. Instead, he wiped his blade clean and sheathed it. That's restraint, he said simply. The silence from the Xal'Tor was deafening. The atmosphere inside the Xal'Tor battle arena was electric, charged with the weight of expectation. The assembled warriors pounded their fists against their chests in a steady, rhythmic beat, a ritualistic display meant to stir the blood. It worked. The air felt thick with the anticipation of violence. Cole Reynolds stood in his designated position, rolling his shoulders, assessing the battlefield. The ground beneath his boots was dry and cracked, the gravity slightly heavier than Earth's but manageable. The artificial lighting overhead cast stark shadows, giving the whole place the feel of some ancient coliseum where men were thrown to beasts for entertainment. Opposite him, Cathal exuded raw confidence. The towering Xal'Tor warrior stretched his thick neck with a slow, deliberate motion, as if loosening muscles that had never known defeat. The wounds Reynolds had given him in their first exchange had already sealed over, dark blood scabbed into his thick, armored skin. His plasma blades hummed, their edges vibrating at an energy frequency that could carve through metal like butter. Cathal tilted his head. I'll admit, human, you surprised me. His voice carried through the arena, meant for the audience as much as Reynolds. You fight well. But now I fight seriously. Reynolds didn't respond. He didn't need to. Words weren't going to matter here. The Xal'Tor officiator raised his hand. The chanting died down. Silence stretched for a long measured beat. Then the hand dropped. Cathal exploded forward. Reynolds barely had time to register movement before the Xal'Tor was already on him, plasma blades slashing in a precise, fluid arc. He twisted, dodging the first, ducking the second. The heat of the blades seared close enough to singe the fabric of his combat harness. He countered with a sharp kick to Cathal's knee, but the alien pivoted at the last second, absorbing the blow like a tank absorbing small arms fire. Too fast. Too strong. Cathal pressed the attack, driving him back with a flurry of strikes. Reynolds dodged, blocked, weaved through the onslaught, but the Xal'Tor wasn't just a brute relying on strength. He was a seasoned warrior, precise and disciplined, pushing Reynolds into unfavorable positions. A feint, a sudden shift, Cathal's blade came low, catching Reynolds off guard. The plasma edge barely missed his ribs, slicing clean through his harness and leaving a shallow burn along his side. The pain was immediate, sharp, but Reynolds didn't let it slow him. He stepped back, recalibrating. Cathal grinned, fangs bared. "You bleed." Reynolds exhaled through his nose. "So do you." Before Cathal could react, Reynolds surged forward, feinting high before dropping low, sweeping the Xal'Tor's leg out from under him. The alien's balance wavered, just a fraction, just enough. Reynolds capitalized, driving an elbow into Cathal's side, striking the same wounded area from their last encounter. The force sent the alien stumbling, and for the first time, the crowd's rhythmic pounding faltered. Cathal's eyes burned with something new. Not just anger. Not just aggression. Respect. He spat dark ichor onto the dirt. Good. Then he activated his combat enhancements. The effect was immediate. His armor pulsed with an internal energy surge, microservos and biological augmentations amplifying his speed, his strength. His next move was a blur. He closed the gap between them in a single breath, faster than before, faster than should have been possible. Reynolds barely had time to twist away, but even at half contact, the impact sent him skidding backward, boots dragging deep grooves into the dirt. The crowd roared, sensing the shift. Reynolds steadied himself, heart hammering. He needed to reassess. The Xal'Tor weren't just strong, they had combat augmentations that put them above peak human performance. That wasn't just training. That was biomechanical superiority. Cathal flexed his fingers, his stance looser now, more confident. "Did you think we were fighting at full strength before, human?" His plasma blades crackled, glowing brighter. "You are not facing a warrior. You are facing a god among warriors." Reynolds wiped a bead of blood from the corner of his mouth. "Yeah. You talk too much for a god." Cathal lunged. This time Reynolds didn't dodge. He met the charge head-on. At the last second he shifted, angling his body just enough to redirect Cathal's momentum instead of stopping it. He twisted, grabbed Cathal's wrist mid-swing, and used the Xal'Tor's own force against him. The warrior's sheer momentum sent him stumbling past Reynolds, off balance for a half a second too long. Reynolds drove his combat knife straight into the gap between Cathal's armor plates. The blade sank deep. Cathal howled. The crowd erupted. The warrior staggered, clutching his side, dark blood oozing between his fingers. But he wasn't down. Not yet. Reynolds withdrew the blade, stepping back, breath steady despite the burn along his ribs. "We done here?" Cathal's breathing was heavy, ragged. His stance had shifted, wider, defensive ***. He was in pain. He was calculating. But he wasn't stopping. Reynolds exhaled. "Fine." Cathal rushed forward again, wounded but still fast. Reynolds didn't evade this time. He stepped inside the attack, parrying the first blade with his forearm guard, locking Cathal's wrist before driving his knee up into the warrior's jaw with brutal efficiency. The impact sent a sickening crack through the air. Cathal reeled, but even then he didn't fall. Stubborn bastard. The Xal'Tor warriors watching from the sidelines had gone silent. No chanting. No pounding of fists. Just stunned silence as their champion, their finest warrior, fought not against an opponent, but against inevitability ***. Reynolds watched as Cathal's body wavered, his eyes flickering between stubborn resolve and reluctant understanding. "Yield," Reynolds said, voice even. "You've lost." Cathal's breathing was shallow, his form swaying. His plasma blades dimmed, flickering as his enhanced energy reserves drained from his wounds. His fingers twitched as if debating one last desperate attack. Then, slowly he lowered his weapons. The silence stretched. Then the officiator stepped forward, raising a hand. "The duel has concluded." Reynolds didn't move, muscles still coiled, still ready. He wasn't convinced the Xal'Tor would honor their own rules. But Cathal turned to his warlord, to Crex, and with whatever dignity he had left, he kneeled. The meaning was clear. The Xal'Tor had just learned why humans don't fight duels. They win wars. The silence stretched long after Cathal's weapons dimmed, the weight of the moment settling over the arena like an executioner's blade. The Xal'Tor had gathered in anticipation of a spectacle, a swift and brutal reaffirmation of their supremacy. Instead they had witnessed something else entirely. Reynolds stood over his fallen opponent, knife still in hand, his breathing steady despite the burning pain in his ribs. He had been here before, different battlefields, different enemies, but always the same outcome. The victor standing, the defeated kneeling, the air thick with the scent of blood and disbelief. Crex had not moved from his seat, but the tension in his jaw was unmistakable. This was not how the duel was supposed to end. It was not how any of them had expected it to end. He had sent a warrior, a paragon of their martial tradition, against a human soldier, believing the outcome inevitable. And yet Cathal knelt. The Xal'Tor champion's claws dug into the dirt, his breathing shallow but controlled. He had been beaten and he knew it. Even now, his instincts demanded he rise, fight again, reclaim his honor, but some part of him, the part that had survived this long, understood the futility of that choice. He had faced skilled opponents before but never like this. Never someone who fought not for honor, not for spectacle, but with the cold, methodical precision of one whose only goal was survival. Cathal spat dark ichor onto the ground, then lifted his head. His mandibles twitched and for the first time his voice lacked arrogance. "I underestimated you, human." Reynolds exhaled, shifting the knife in his grip before sliding it back into its sheath. "Yeah, I got that impression." The crowd murmured, the guttural tones of the Xal'Tor warriors betraying their unease. Some looked to their warlord, waiting for a decree. Others watched Reynolds, eyes narrowed as if seeing him for the first time. Then Viecrex rose. The heavy plates of his armor shifted as he moved, the ceremonial cloak draped over his shoulders billowing slightly in the artificial wind of the arena's environmental controls. His eyes, burning like molten gold, locked onto Reynolds with an intensity that would have made lesser men falter. "This is unacceptable," he said, voice low but carrying through the space with the force of a gunshot. "This duel was meant to prove a point. Instead, it has only raised questions." Reynolds didn't flinch. That's what happens when you start believing your own propaganda. A ripple of movement ran through the assembled warriors. An insult. A challenge. Viecrex descended the steps of his viewing platform, moving with the deliberate grace of a predator. Cathal stiffened as his warlord approached, but he did not rise. He had made his choice and now he would face the consequences. But Viecrex did not look at his fallen champion. He stopped before Reynolds, towering over him, the scent of ozone and charred metal radiating from his armor. "You think this means something?" Viecrex asked. "That a single victory against one warrior changes the truth of our superiority?" Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Instead he studied the warlord, the way his claws flexed at his sides, the subtle shifts in his stance. He was a warrior, not just a ruler. He hadn't just sent Cathal into this fight out of protocol. He had expected him to win. He had needed him to win. And now he was deciding whether to correct that mistake himself. Reynolds sighed. "I think it means you don't know what you're dealing with." Viecrex's eyes narrowed. Reynolds took a slow step forward, closing the gap between them, his movements unhurried, deliberate. "You thought this was a duel. A contest. A test of strength." He gestured loosely to Cathal, still kneeling in the dirt. "That's your mistake. You think humans fight for sport. For pride. You think we measure victory the way you do." He shook his head. "We don't." Viecrex's mandibles tightened. "Then how do you measure it?" Reynolds met his gaze without hesitation. "By who's still standing when it's over." The warlord's claws flexed again, his body coiled like a spring. For a moment, it seemed inevitable. He would strike, he would demand another duel, another test, another chance to prove himself. But something held him back. The weight of his warrior's eyes. The sound of Cathal's ragged breathing. The lingering silence of an audience that had come expecting dominance and found something else entirely. And perhaps, somewhere beneath all of that, fear. Not of Reynolds. Not of one soldier. Of what he represented. Viecrex inhaled slowly through his nostrils, then let it out in a controlled exhale. "You speak boldly for a species that has yet to be truly tested." Reynolds smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Test us then." The warlord's jaw tightened. He held Reynolds' gaze a moment longer, then turned sharply, his cloak snapping behind him as he strode away. He did not offer a word of concession. No declaration of defeat. But the duel was over. And that was enough. The murmurs among the warriors grew louder, uncertainty seeping into their ranks like a slow poison. Cathal finally forced himself to his feet, swaying slightly before steadying. He looked at Reynolds again, and this time, there was no disdain in his expression. Only understanding. Reynolds exhaled, rolling his shoulders. His ribs throbbed, his muscles ached, but it was done. For now. Because there was something in the way Viecrex had walked away. Not retreat. Not resignation. Just a promise. This wasn't over. The Xal'Tor warriors dispersed in uneasy silence, their rhythmic chants gone, their once boisterous confidence replaced by a quiet, simmering uncertainty. The air still carried the scent of scorched metal and blood, but the energy of the arena had changed. The duel was over, but the consequences of its outcome had only begun to ripple outward. Cole Reynolds remained standing at the center of it all, his body sore but steady, his heartbeat a controlled rhythm against his ribs. He knew this kind of silence well. It was the silence that came after the battle, after the bodies hit the ground, after the victors walked away while the defeated were left to pick up the pieces. The Warlord hadn't called for another fight, but Reynolds could feel it, the weight of his lingering presence, the calculations happening behind those cold, predatory eyes. Cathal had managed to regain his footing, though the effort had cost him. He still bled, still favored one side, but there was something different in his expression now. The arrogance had burned away, the certainty of Xal'Tor's superiority crumbling under the weight of what had just happened. He had been their finest warrior, the one meant to set an example. And yet, here he stood, broken but alive, facing a human he should have destroyed. "You had the chance to kill me," Cathal said, his voice quieter than before but no less intense. "Why didn't you?" Reynolds looked at him, then at the warriors who had stayed behind, the ones who had watched everything with narrowed eyes, their minds racing to make sense of what they had witnessed. He let the question linger in the air before answering. "I wasn't here to kill you," he said finally. "I was here to show you something." Cathal bared his fangs in something that wasn't quite a snarl, but wasn't quite a smile either. "And what was that?" Reynolds took a slow step closer, lowering his voice just enough that only those near could hear. "That if you ever make us fight for real, you won't get a duel. You'll get a war. And you won't win." The Xal'Tor warrior held his gaze, but there was no challenge in it this time. Only the weight of understanding. A low growl of discontent rumbled through the crowd as Warlord Xal'Tor descended from the high platform, his movements deliberate, measured. He strode across the battlefield with the silent authority of a leader who had already decided what came next. Reynolds stood his ground. Xal'Tor stopped a few paces away, his golden eyes scanning Reynolds from head to toe, as if seeing him anew. A slow inhale, nostrils flaring before he spoke. "You do not fight as warriors do," he said, his voice edged with something that might have been grudging respect. "You do not fight with honor." Reynolds tilted his head slightly. "I fight to win." Xal'Tor exhaled, the tension in his body shifting. Not relaxing, not conceding, just adapting to a reality he had not anticipated. "And what do you think winning looks like, human?" Reynolds took his time answering. "It looks like me walking out of here alive. It looks like you realizing that next time, it won't just be one of me." A flicker of something passed through the warlord's gaze. Recognition. He turned, addressing his warriors now, his voice carrying through the arena like a commandment. "Cathal fought well. He brought honor to our kind." He let the words hang before adding, "But today we have learned something greater than honor." A murmur spread through the crowd. Reynolds knew exactly what they were struggling with. The Xal'Tor had spent generations believing that war was measured in duels, in single moments of battle that determined who was the strongest, the most deserving of victory. But humans didn't fight in moments. They fought in strategies. In brutality. In ruthlessness that didn't leave room for second chances. Xal'Tor turned back to Reynolds. "You fight as a species that does not seek glory. Only survival." Reynolds didn't blink. "That's why we're still here." The warlord studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. It wasn't a gesture of submission, nor was it one of continued hostility. It was something else. A recognition that the galaxy had changed. Xal'Tor turned sharply on his heel, issuing a single command to his warriors in the Xal'Tor tongue. One by one they followed, Cathal included, though the last look he gave Reynolds was not one of hatred. It was something heavier. The Xal'Tor warlord didn't offer a parting threat. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. As the last of the warriors departed, Reynolds released a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle. He rolled his shoulders, stretching the tension from them, and turned toward the observation deck where Colonel Grissom had been watching. The older officer was already waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Reynolds walked up to him, stopping just short of the exit. "That went well." Grissom snorted. "If by well, you mean we avoided an immediate war, then sure. That went well." Reynolds smirked, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "They'll think twice before challenging us again." Grissom exhaled. "No. They'll think 1,000 times. And that's more dangerous." Reynolds glanced back at the empty arena, feeling the truth of those words settle in his gut. The Xal'Tor weren't the kind to forget a lesson like this. They would study it, turn it over in their minds, break it down into something they could counter. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. Grissom placed a hand on Reynolds' shoulder, squeezing lightly. "Let's get you patched up." Reynolds nodded, but even as they walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war hadn't been prevented. It had just been delayed.